I love you. The message appeared on the glowing screen of a phone resting beside a polished glass pitcher in the center of a silent conference table, and for a moment no one moved. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Harper Logistics overlooked nearly half of downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, sunlight reflecting off steel towers and drifting through the tall windows like warm water, but inside the room the air had suddenly turned still. Evelyn Harper, founder and CEO, stared at the notification that had just slid across her phone. The sender name read Malik Carter. Around the table, a dozen executives shuffled spreadsheets and tablets, unaware that their boss had just received 3 words that did not belong in a corporate meeting. Evelyn was known for precision. Her schedules were timed to the minute, her contracts measured in millions, her decisions rarely questioned. Personal messages did not reach her during board meetings, and certainly not from a warehouse employee whose job usually involved forklifts, inventory scanners, and the long humming aisles of Distribution Center 3 on the outskirts of the city. The phone vibrated once more, gently against the glass surface of the table, like a small heartbeat trying to speak again. Evelyn's thumb hovered above the screen, but did not touch it. Across from her, the chief operations officer continued explaining quarterly freight projections, his voice steady, graphs glowing on the wall monitor behind him, yet Evelyn heard none of it. Instead, she looked again at the message. 3 simple words. Not flirtatious. Not dramatic. Just plain, almost soft. I love you. For a moment, she wondered if it had been meant for someone else entirely. A stray message drifting into the wrong inbox the way an envelope sometimes slipped into the wrong mailbox on a quiet suburban street. Her phone chimed again. A second text appeared beneath the first. Sorry. Wrong person. A few of the executives paused mid-sentence as the faint notification sound echoed across the glass and chrome room. Evelyn calmly turned her phone face down, her expression unchanged, but something subtle had shifted. The meeting continued, numbers and logistics flowing through the air like carefully arranged dominoes. Yet her mind had moved somewhere else entirely, down past the highways and warehouses to the wide concrete loading docks where trucks idled and workers in reflective vests guided pallets beneath bright industrial lights. Malik Carter stood somewhere in that world right now, probably surrounded by the smell of cardboard, diesel, and dust from 100 moving shipments. 34 years old. Night shift technician. Excellent attendance record. Evelyn remembered the name because she had reviewed thousands of employee files during the company's rapid expansion, and some names lingered longer than others. Outside the boardroom window, a delivery helicopter crossed the skyline, its shadow sliding briefly across the buildings like a passing thought. Evelyn finally lifted the phone again, the cool glass smooth beneath her fingers, and reread the 2 messages slowly. The first one lingered longer in her mind than the apology. Not because of romance or embarrassment or curiosity, but because something about the simplicity of those 3 words felt strangely out of place in the polished machinery of corporate life. Then, very quietly, almost to herself, Evelyn Harper whispered the name on the screen. Malik Carter. And somewhere across the city, inside a cavernous warehouse lit by rows of humming fluorescent lights, a man had just realized that the most powerful woman in his company might now be holding the message he never meant for her to see. The warehouse at Distribution Center 3 stretched nearly the length of 3 football fields, a long cavern of steel beams and humming conveyor belts where the air carried the faint smell of cardboard, machine oil, and the cool breath of industrial air conditioners fighting the Carolina summer heat. Malik Carter stood near dock door 12 with a handheld scanner resting against his palm, watching the green numbers on its screen blink as another pallet rolled down the belt toward a waiting truck bound for Atlanta, Georgia. The steady rhythm of work surrounded him like the ticking of a giant clock, forklifts gliding through painted lanes, radios crackling softly on workers' belts, and the distant rumble of diesel engines idling outside the loading bays. Malik had been working in warehouses since he was 20 years old, long enough to know every sound meant something. The slow roll of a pallet jack meant a shipment was moving on schedule. The sharp double beep of a scanner meant a package had been misplaced. The quiet moments between trucks meant the shift supervisor was probably about to assign another trailer to unload. His shift started at 4 in the afternoon and often ended close to midnight, 6 days a week. If overtime was available, it was not glamorous work, but it was steady, Instead he meant groceries, electricity, and the small two-bedroom duplex he rented 12 miles away in a quiet neighborhood where children rode bicycles in the evenings. Malik glanced down at his phone again, the same phone that had slipped from his pocket earlier while he checked an incoming message from the one person who mattered more than anything else in his world. A small photograph filled the screen. A 6-year-old girl with curly hair tied into two bright pink ribbons grinned at the camera while holding a drawing made with thick crayon lines. Her name was Lila Carter. Every evening around 7:30, she sent him a message from the old tablet they kept on the kitchen counter. Usually something simple like "Good night, Daddy," or "Did you see my picture from school?" Malik had answered the same way almost every night since she learned how to type the words herself. "I love you." It was a habit now, a quiet promise sent across the miles while he stood beneath warehouse lights, and she sat at the kitchen table, finishing her homework with a bowl of apple slices beside her. Tonight had been no different. He had opened her message, smiled at the drawing she had sent of a yellow house and a stick-figure family standing under a giant sun, and typed the same 3 words he always did before sliding the phone back into his pocket. But somewhere between the conveyor belt and the loading dock, the screen had shifted, the contact name had changed, and the message had traveled somewhere it had never been meant to go. Malik rubbed the back of his neck and exhaled slowly, the warm warehouse air brushing past his face as another truck door slammed shut outside. He had already sent the apology text as soon as he realized the mistake, but the quiet embarrassment still lingered in his chest like a stone dropped into calm water. Around him the shift continued without noticing anything unusual. A coworker laughed near the break room door. A forklift hummed past carrying a stack of wrapped boxes almost 8 feet tall. The giant digital clock above the shipping board clicked from 6:42 to 6:43 in glowing red numbers. Yet somewhere high above the city skyline, inside a glass office tower where people wore tailored suits and spoke in careful corporate language, the message he had meant only for his daughter now rested on the phone of the woman who owned the entire company. Morning arrived quietly over Charlotte, North Carolina, the pale orange light of sunrise sliding between rows of brick townhouses and narrow maple trees that lined the residential streets 12 miles from the Harper Logistics headquarters. Inside a modest duplex with white siding and a small front porch, Malik Carter stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of orange juice while the low hum of a coffee maker filled the room. The kitchen was simple but clean, with a small refrigerator covered in colorful drawings held by alphabet magnets, and a calendar marked with school events, grocery lists, and the occasional reminder written in thick black marker. Malik had finished his night shift only a few hours earlier, yet mornings still belonged to his daughter. Lila Carter sat at the round kitchen table wearing a bright yellow t-shirt with tiny blue stars scattered across the fabric, her small legs swinging above the floor while she concentrated on coloring the wings of a butterfly in a workbook from school. Sunlight spilled through the window above the sink, catching the curls in her hair and lighting the crayons spread across the table like scattered pieces of candy. Malik set a plate of toast in front of her and leaned gently against the counter, watching her work with the quiet patience of a man who had learned how to measure life in small peaceful moments rather than grand ambitions. Being a single father had changed the way he saw time. Every morning mattered. Every ride to school mattered. Every goodnight message mattered. After his wife passed away 4 years earlier, the world had grown heavier, but Lila had given it balance again, the way a single bright candle can soften a dark room. Malik checked the clock above the microwave. 7:25. In 10 minutes they would leave for the elementary school 2 miles away, the same short drive they made every weekday along tree-lined streets and quiet intersections where crossing guards waved at passing parents. Lila looked up from her coloring book and smiled. "Daddy, did you see my message last night?" Malik nodded with a tired but warm grin. "I saw it, sweetheart. Your picture of the house looked perfect." Lila giggled and pushed the drawing across the table, revealing a crayon sun almost twice the size of the house beneath it. "It needs a dog," she said thoughtfully. "Every house needs a dog." Malik laughed softly and ruffled her hair before reaching for his phone on the counter. For a brief second the memory of the previous night returned like a shadow crossing sunlight. The message, the mistake, the apology that followed. He had hoped that by morning it would feel smaller, something easily forgotten in the rush of corporate life far above the warehouse floor. In a company that employed more than 2,000 workers across several states, one accidental text from a night shift technician should have been nothing more than a tiny ripple in a vast ocean. Malik slid the phone back into his pocket and finished his coffee while Lila carefully colored the last wing of her butterfly purple. Outside, the quiet neighborhood slowly came alive with the familiar rhythm of morning. A school bus groaned to life down the street. A neighbor rolled a trash bin toward the curb. Somewhere a lawn sprinkler clicked in steady circles across bright green grass. Malik grabbed his car keys from the kitchen hook and opened the front door, holding it wide as Lila hopped down from her chair and ran past him with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The air outside carried the fresh scent of damp pavement and early sunlight warming the sidewalks. Malik locked the door behind them and walked toward his aging silver sedan parked in the driveway. He had no idea that across the city, inside the top-floor office of Harper Logistics, Evelyn Harper had already read his message 3 times that morning and was quietly asking a question that no one in the executive suite expected to hear. Who exactly is Malik Carter? High above the city streets, the top floor of Harper Logistics headquarters felt like a different world entirely, a place where the hum of warehouses and the rumble of truck engines never reached the polished marble floors or the quiet halls lined with framed contracts and industry awards. Evelyn Harper stood beside the wide glass wall of her office, watching the morning traffic crawl along Interstate 277 like a slow ribbon of headlights beneath the pale Carolina sun. The office was spacious, but minimal, filled with clean lines, dark walnut shelves, and a long desk positioned with precise symmetry so that the entire skyline of Charlotte unfolded in front of it. Most executives began their day with numbers and reports, but Evelyn had started this one with a single question. Her assistant, Daniel Reeves, stood near the desk holding a tablet and scanning through the employee database with the careful focus of someone who understood that when Evelyn Harper asked a question, she rarely asked it without reason. Malik Carter, Daniel read aloud after a moment, his voice steady in the quiet room. Distribution Center 3. Night shift logistics technician. Employed for 3 years and 8 months. Evelyn did not turn from the window. Attendance record, she asked. Daniel tapped the screen again. Nearly perfect. 2 sick days in the last 18 months. Performance reviews are consistently above average. Forklift certification. Inventory accuracy rate 98%. Evelyn slowly folded her arms, her reflection faint in the glass. The message from the night before rested in her mind with an odd clarity. Not the apology that followed it, but the 3 words themselves. They had not sounded careless. They had sounded certain. Daniel cleared his throat slightly. Should I contact Human Resources for further details? Evelyn finally turned toward him, her expression thoughtful rather than stern. Does he have any disciplinary history? Daniel scrolled once more. None. No warnings, no complaints. Actually, his supervisor notes that he often volunteers for overtime when the center is short-staffed. Evelyn walked back toward her desk, the soft heels of her shoes tapping lightly against the polished floor. On the corner of the desk, her phone rested beside a stack of documents awaiting signature. The screen was dark now, but she knew the message was still there, sitting quietly in the thread where it had arrived the night before. I love you. Daniel waited patiently, unsure why a warehouse employee had suddenly become a topic inside the executive suite. Finally, Evelyn asked another question. Does he have family listed on his employee profile? Daniel nodded after another glance at the tablet. One dependent. Daughter. 6 years old. The words lingered in the air for a moment, and something in Evelyn's posture softened just slightly, though she did not explain why. She had spent most of her career surrounded by negotiations, acquisitions, and financial forecasts, a world where emotions rarely entered the room without invitation. Yet the simplicity of that accidental message had cut through the machinery of corporate routine in a way she could not quite dismiss. Outside the office window, a helicopter passed across the skyline again, its shadow sliding briefly over the buildings below. Evelyn picked up her phone and read the message once more before locking the screen. Then she looked at Daniel with quiet decision. I would like to meet him. Daniel blinked in mild surprise. Meet him? Yes, Evelyn said calmly. Arrange for Malik Carter to come to headquarters tomorrow afternoon. Daniel hesitated only a second before nodding. Of course. As he turned toward the door to make the arrangements, Evelyn stepped back toward the window again, her gaze drifting down toward the distant highways that carried thousands of workers across the city every day. Somewhere out there, in a warehouse filled with the noise of forklifts and conveyor belts, a single father was finishing another long shift without the slightest idea that the message he had meant only for his daughter had just changed the direction of someone else's day. The next afternoon, the sky above Charlotte carried the pale blue calm of early spring, and Malik Carter stood outside the Harper Logistics headquarters building feeling as if he had stepped into someone else's life for the day. The tower rose more than 30 floors above the street, its glass surface reflecting sunlight so brightly that Malik had to shield his eyes when he first stepped out of the parking garage. Employees in tailored jackets and pressed shirts moved through the revolving doors with quiet confidence, their voices low and professional, the polished marble lobby echoing softly beneath their footsteps. Malik adjusted the collar of the only dress shirt he owned, a dark blue button-down he usually wore to church on Sundays, and checked the time on his phone again. 2:32 in the afternoon. His meeting was scheduled for 2:45. The message from Human Resources had arrived early that morning while he was driving home after dropping Lila at school. Please report to the executive floor tomorrow afternoon for a meeting with Ms. Evelyn Harper. No explanation. No details. Just the time and the address. Malik had read the email twice before pulling the car to the side of the road because the words had not quite made sense the first time. Warehouse technicians did not meet with the chief executive officer of a multi-state logistics company. Warehouse technicians unloaded trucks, scanned freight labels, and made sure shipments left the dock on time. Yet here he was, standing beneath a ceiling nearly 3 stories high, while a security guard at the front desk politely directed him toward the elevators reserved for visitors. Malik signed his name in the lobby logbook, the pen feeling strangely heavy in his hand, and clipped the temporary visitor badge to his shirt pocket. Around him, the building smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee, drifting from a small cafe tucked beside the reception area. A large digital directory listed departments and executive offices in neat white letters across a black screen. Harper Logistics Executive Suite, Level 32. Malik stepped into the elevator with 3 other employees who barely glanced at him as the doors closed with a quiet metallic hum. The ride upward felt longer than it probably was. The floor numbers blinked slowly from 10 to 15 to 20, each soft chime echoing inside the narrow space like a ticking clock. Malik folded his hands together and stared at the stainless steel wall, his reflection staring back at him with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He kept replaying the mistake from the night before in his mind, wondering if the meeting had something to do with that message. Perhaps it had reached someone higher than he realized. Perhaps the apology had not erased the awkwardness the way he hoped. The elevator finally stopped with a gentle sound, and the doors slid open to reveal a quiet hallway lined with tall windows and framed photographs of Harper Logistics trucks crossing highways beneath wide American skies. The atmosphere on the executive floor felt almost silent compared to the constant movement of the warehouse. Soft carpet replaced concrete floors, and voices were low enough that conversations barely carried beyond the nearest office door. A receptionist looked up from a sleek white desk and offered a polite smile. "You must be Mr. Carter." Malik nodded and adjusted the strap of the worn leather folder he had brought with him, even though he was not sure why. The receptionist pressed a button on her phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. "Ms. Harper, Mr. Carter has arrived." There was a brief pause before she looked back at him with a calm expression. "She will see you now." Malik followed her down a corridor toward a pair of tall wooden doors at the far end of the hallway. His footsteps felt strangely loud against the soft carpet, each step carrying him closer to a meeting he never imagined having. When the receptionist opened the door and stepped aside, Malik saw the wide office beyond it and the woman standing near the window waiting for him, her posture calm, her eyes steady, and the quiet sunlight behind her casting a soft glow across the room. For a moment, Malik forgot every explanation he had rehearsed on the elevator ride up, because the person standing there was not just a distant name in company emails anymore. Evelyn Harper had been waiting for him. Malik Carter stepped into the office slowly, the quiet click of the door closing behind him sounding louder than it should have in the stillness of the room. The space was larger than any office he had ever seen, wide glass windows stretching from floor to ceiling and revealing the entire Charlotte skyline beyond them. Late afternoon sunlight poured across the polished wooden floor and reflected gently off the glass desk positioned near the center of the room. For a moment Malik simply stood there, aware of the difference between his world and this one. Back at Distribution Center 3, the air carried the constant buzz of conveyor belts and the sharp beeps of barcode scanners. Here there was only silence and the faint, distant murmur of city traffic 32 floors below. Evelyn Harper turned from the window and studied him with calm curiosity, the same steady expression she carried during board meetings and negotiations worth millions of dollars. Yet this moment felt strangely different even to her. Malik Carter looked exactly as his file had suggested. Tall, quiet, and composed in a way that did not try to impress anyone. His dark blue shirt was neatly pressed but clearly not expensive, and the visitor badge clipped to his pocket reflected a small square of sunlight as he shifted his weight slightly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter," Evelyn said gently. Her voice carried none of the sharp authority that many employees expected from a chief executive officer. Malik nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me." His voice was calm but careful, the tone of someone who had learned long ago that respect often spoke louder than explanations. Evelyn gestured toward a chair across from her desk. "Please have a seat." Malik lowered himself into the chair slowly, placing the worn leather folder he carried on his lap, even though he had not brought any documents to present. For a moment neither of them spoke. Evelyn walked behind the desk and rested her hand lightly on the phone lying beside a stack of reports. The screen remained dark, but she knew exactly what message was waiting there. Finally, she lifted her eyes to meet his. "Mr. Carter, I imagine you might be wondering why I asked you here today." Malik nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. I was a little surprised." Evelyn allowed the faintest hint of a smile to appear before she reached for the phone and tapped the screen. The message thread opened quietly between them. She turned the phone slightly so that he could see it from across the desk. 3 words appeared on the screen, followed by the apology that came seconds later. Malik felt the warmth rise slowly up the back of his neck as recognition settled in. "I understand," he said quickly but respectfully. "That message was not meant for you. It was meant for my daughter. I realized the mistake right after I sent it." Evelyn did not interrupt him. Instead, she watched the way he spoke, the way his voice carried no panic or excuses, only simple honesty. "I send that message to her most nights," Malik continued. "She usually texts me before she goes to bed and I answer when I am on my break at the warehouse. Last night, I must have tapped the wrong contact without noticing. I am very sorry if it caused any confusion." Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair, studying him for another moment. Then she asked quietly, "How old is your daughter, Mr. Carter?" 6, he answered. "Her name is Lila." The room fell into a thoughtful silence again as sunlight shifted slowly across the desk between them. Somewhere far below, a distant horn echoed from a passing truck on the highway, faint enough that neither of them reacted. Evelyn looked down briefly at the phone again before meeting his eyes once more. "You did not cause confusion, Mr. Carter," she said calmly. "If anything, your message simply gave me a reason to learn more about one of the people who keeps this company running every night." The quiet inside Evelyn Harper's office settled deeper after her words, the kind of silence that was not uncomfortable but thoughtful, as if the room itself were pausing to listen more closely. Malik Carter sat with his hands resting loosely on the leather folder in his lap, the late afternoon sunlight reflecting softly across the polished desk between them. From this height, the city of Charlotte stretched wide beneath the windows, highways threading through clusters of buildings and neighborhoods that seemed small from 32 floors above the ground. For years Malik had moved through that city mostly at night, driving the same familiar roads between the warehouse and the small duplex where his daughter waited for him each morning. The corporate tower where he now sat had always been something distant on the skyline, a place he passed on the highway without imagining he would ever walk inside it. Evelyn rested her elbow lightly on the desk and regarded him with calm curiosity. "Mr. Carter," she said gently, "how long have you worked the night shift at Distribution Center 3? "Almost 4 years now," he replied. "I started there a few months after my daughter turned 2. The schedule worked better because I could be home with her during the day." Evelyn nodded slowly, absorbing the simple practicality in his answer. Raising a child alone was not something most executive reports ever mentioned, Yet the quiet strength behind his routine was easy to recognize. That must be exhausting, she said after a moment. Malik gave a small, thoughtful shrug. Some days it is, but she makes it worth it. Evelyn's expression softened slightly at the certainty in his voice. She turned the phone once more, glancing again at the message that had brought him here. It had been written without hesitation, 3 words sent with the confidence of someone who said them often. Most people in this building, she said quietly, spend their days talking about growth charts and quarterly profits. They measure success in percentages and shipping volume. Malik listened respectfully, unsure where the conversation was leading. Evelyn continued, "Yet last night a simple message from a warehouse employee reminded me that the reason companies exist in the first place is because of people and the lives they support." Malik shifted slightly in his chair, the words catching him off guard. "I am just doing my job, ma'am," he said honestly. Evelyn shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Carter. You are doing something more important than that. You are raising a child while carrying a full work schedule, and from what I have read in your record you do both with remarkable consistency." She leaned forward slightly, her tone thoughtful rather than formal. "Tell me something. What does your daughter want to be when she grows up?" Malik smiled for the first time since entering the office, the tension easing from his shoulders. "That changes every week," he said with quiet amusement. "Last month she wanted to be a veterinarian because she loves animals. Yesterday she told me she wants to build houses so everyone can have a place to live." Evelyn allowed herself a small laugh, the sound light and genuine. "That sounds like someone with a very big heart." Malik nodded proudly. "She does." For a moment neither of them spoke again. Outside the window the sun had begun drifting lower toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the city streets far below. Finally Evelyn stood and walked toward the glass wall once more, looking out across the skyline before speaking again in a calm voice. "Mr. Carter, would you mind if I asked you one more question?" Malik straightened slightly in his chair. "Of course, ma'am." Evelyn turned back toward him, her expression thoughtful but warm. "Tonight when you send that message to your daughter again, what exactly do you usually say after those 3 words? Malik Carter considered the question for a moment, the quiet in the office stretching gently between them as the late afternoon sun continued to slide across the floor in warm golden bands. He had not expected the conversation to move in this direction. Most meetings with supervisors or managers usually involved schedules, safety reminders, or shipment numbers that needed to improve before the next quarterly review. No one had ever asked him what he said to his daughter at night. He leaned back slightly in the chair and let out a thoughtful breath before answering. "Usually after I tell her I love her, I remind her that I am proud of her," he said calmly. "Sometimes I ask her what the best part of her day was. Other nights I tell her to remember that she can become anything she dreams about if she keeps trying." Evelyn Harper listened carefully, her attention steady and sincere. From the outside the moment might have looked simple, just 2 people speaking quietly in an office high above the city, but to Evelyn the conversation felt different from most of the meetings that filled her schedule. In boardrooms people often chose their words to impress or persuade. Malik Carter spoke as someone who had nothing to prove, only a life to explain. "That sounds like very good advice," Evelyn said softly. Malik gave a modest nod. "I try my best. Being a parent means you have to remind them of those things even when you are tired. Especially when you are tired." Evelyn walked slowly back toward the desk and rested her hands lightly against its edge, studying the calm confidence in his voice. In the corporate world, many people spoke about leadership in terms of strategy and influence, yet the quiet responsibility in Malik's routine carried a kind of leadership that did not appear in financial reports. She looked down briefly at the phone resting beside the documents before turning her attention back to him. "Mr. Carter," she said thoughtfully, "last night when your message arrived I assumed it was a mistake, and of course it was. But it also reminded me that people inside this company have stories that rarely reach this office." Malik listened respectfully, unsure where her thoughts were leading. Evelyn continued in the same calm tone. "Running a business can sometimes feel like managing numbers on a screen rather than the lives behind those numbers. Yet every shipment we move, every truck that leaves our docks, represents someone working hard to support their family." Malik nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in that statement from his own experience on the warehouse floor. Evelyn straightened slightly and walked toward the window again, the skyline stretching wide behind her. The sun was lower now, casting long orange reflections across the glass towers of downtown Charlotte. When she turned back to him, her expression carried a quiet warmth that had not been there when the meeting began. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I asked you here today because your message made me curious. But after speaking with you, I realized it did something more important. It reminded me that dedication does not always sit in executive offices. Sometimes it works the night shift and still finds the energy to send encouragement to a 6-year-old child before the day is over." Malik felt a slight warmth rise in his chest. Not pride exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of being understood. Evelyn returned to the desk and picked up a folder that had been waiting beside the phone. "I have been thinking about something since this morning," she said as she opened it. "And I would like to make a small change that might help you and others who work the same shift schedule." Malik looked up with quiet curiosity, sensing that the conversation was about to turn in a direction he had not anticipated. Malik Carter watched as Evelyn Harper opened the folder slowly, the quiet rustle of paper sounding almost ceremonial in the calm office. The fading sunlight behind her had turned a deeper shade of amber, casting long reflections across the glass wall and stretching soft shadows across the polished floor. Outside, the city of Charlotte moved through the early evening rhythm of traffic and distant sirens. Yet inside the room, time seemed to slow. Evelyn placed the folder gently on the desk and slid it across toward him. "This is not a promotion," she said calmly, though a small, thoughtful smile touched the corner of her lips. "But it is a beginning." Malik leaned forward slightly and opened the folder with careful hands. Inside was a short document printed on company letterhead. The words were clear and simple. A pilot program for Harper Logistics night shift employees that would allow flexible start times for single parents who needed to coordinate school schedules. The proposal included a child care support stipend for employees working overnight shifts and a voluntary mentorship program connecting experienced staff with new hires who were balancing family responsibilities. Malik read the lines slowly, his eyes moving back to the beginning once more to be certain he had understood it correctly. "This would help a lot of people," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "That is the idea. Companies spend a great deal of time discussing productivity. Sometimes they forget that stability at home creates stability at work." Malik closed the folder gently, the paper making a soft sound as it settled back against the desk. For a moment, he simply sat there absorbing what he had read. The proposal did not mention his name anywhere, yet he understood that the conversation they had just shared had shaped it in some small but meaningful way. "I do not know what to say," he admitted honestly. "You do not need to say anything," Evelyn replied. "Sometimes the most important improvements start with small reminders." She glanced once more at the phone beside her hand, the message still saved quietly within it like a simple note written in the margin of a long report. A reminder that life outside the office mattered just as much as the numbers inside it. Malik stood slowly, holding the folder carefully as if it carried more weight than paper alone. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me," he said respectfully. Evelyn walked with him toward the door, her expression thoughtful but calm. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter." As he stepped into the quiet hallway again, the soft carpet muffling his footsteps, Malik felt the strange lightness that sometimes follows an unexpected moment of understanding. A receptionist offered him a polite nod as he passed, and the elevator doors opened with a quiet chime when he pressed the button. During the long ride down, he looked again at the folder in his hands, still surprised by how a small mistake had turned into something far larger than embarrassment. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, the evening sky outside had deepened into warm shades of orange and violet. Malik stepped out onto the sidewalk and breathed in the cool air of the city as traffic rolled past on the street. Across town, the warehouse lights would soon flicker on for the night shift, conveyor belts humming back to life beneath rows of fluorescent lamps. And somewhere in a small duplex kitchen, a 6-year-old girl would soon finish her homework and wait for the familiar message that arrived almost every night. When Malik unlocked his car and sat behind the wheel, he pulled out his phone and opened the message thread again. For a moment, he considered deleting the accidental text that had started the entire chain of events. But instead he left it exactly where it was, a quiet reminder that sometimes the simplest words can travel farther than anyone expects.